Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Palomba. Now today we're going to be continuing our discussion on decision making, influences, and social well-being during video gameplay. So when we think about video gameplay, we think about a lot of different characteristics and things that we kind of are engaged with. And so we might think about obstacles and characters and settings, but there are also other things we need to consider, like scarcity, like time, like thinking about other ways in which that we can win. Sometimes when we think about video gameplay, we're also kind of aware of how well other people are doing. And sometimes we want to make sure that we're, well, keeping up with everyone. And sometimes we know that we're not that good at the game. And sometimes we might think about cheating a little bit just to make sure we're keeping up with everyone, and sometimes just to be the best. But why do we worry about that? Why do we worry about cheating? Another element of video gameplay concerns finishing levels. Now, I'm sure some of you have engaged with this particular feature, this notion that we might be playing a video game level and it's partially done, or there's some DLC content that we have to wrap up, or there's materia if you're a Final Fantasy video game player, or there's a sword or a shield you have to find in some hidden mountain or valley. Why do some of us get so crazy about making sure we thoroughly complete each level, each mission, each assignment in Grand Theft Auto or Fortnite or whatever the game may be? Why do we care so much? In this lecture, we're going to be delving into these topics and more. So let's get started. Time. As we were talking about last time, scarcity is an issue in video gameplay. Sometimes there are only so many swords to go around, shields, weapons, magic, power up, whatever it may be, to go around for people. Time pushes us to consume more. That's key. That's a key device that is strategically placed in video gameplay. This idea that if I put a clock on something, you're going to race to complete it, and you might even eat more, or swallow more, or pick up more, or whatever your character does. You might be consuming coins, or eggs, or animals, or whatever it may be during video gameplay. And so time pushes us to complete things not only quickly, but to get as much as we can, especially when that dovetails right along scarcity. When time begins to run out, we work quicker. We know this in the workplace as well, right? If your boss tells you that he needs something by Wednesday and it's, Friday, you might feel okay about it. But if your boss needs something by Wednesday and it's Tuesday morning, you might be sweating a little bit. I've definitely been in those situations myself. And so when time begins to run out, we work quicker. Let's keep going. So if time is running out and some of us are sweating bullets, we're trying to complete a level, we're trying to gather up awards and coins and other items that we need, we might think about subverting rules. We might think about violating social norms. We might think about cheating. Ooh. Are you a cheater? Ooh. I'm sure many of us have cheated in the past. May it be at some sort of carnival game or something trivial. But by and large, most of us have cheated at something in our lives, or will. People are more inclined to cheat if they see others cheat, as it becomes a socially accepted behavior. It's not socially acceptable to cheat on an exam at St. John's University, my current place of employment. It is not socially acceptable. But if students see more and more students cheating, if students see more and more faculty cheating, whatever that may mean, a culture is construed upon which it's okay to cheat. Mazar, Amir, and Arely ran an experiment in which people were asked to solve a puzzle. Now, on average, consumers or participants solved 7 puzzles in 5 minutes. Fine. In one experiment from this study, participants were asked to self-report solved puzzles, told to shred their own answers, and would be paid for it. The amount of solved puzzles all of a sudden jumped to 12. Did these people all of a sudden get good at solving puzzles? No. When a researcher acted as a subject and completed the entire puzzle list in 5 minutes, the amount of solved puzzles jumped to 15. Why? Because if you're in a room and somebody reports that they solved 10 puzzles, another person reports 12, and you've only reported that you've solved 5 puzzles, forget it. You're likely going to say 8. Why? Because other people are doing well, and assuming that all of you have roughly the same IQ, you might say to yourself, well, some of these people are padding their numbers. Some of these people are lying. There's no way Jennifer over there solved 14 puzzles in 5 minutes. I've only solved 5 puzzles in 5 minutes. I'm going to tell the researcher 10. Forget this. And so all of a sudden we can see here how quickly social mores, or social mores, if you will, dissolve. They readily dissolve when cheating is acceptable. Let's keep going. Cheating continued. We cheat as well if it is elsewhere in our in-group. If it is elsewhere in our in-group. So another study by Blackburn pulled online video game profiles from Valve's Steam platform. 700,000 online video game profiles were looked at. 15% of cheaters had other cheaters on friends lists. And 70% had friends lists with 10% cheaters. Do you know cheaters? Cheaters tend to associate with cheaters. That makes sense. We know in society, criminals know other criminals. Now, by no means am I saying or creating some sort of association by which, cheating is tantamount to being a criminal. By no means, no. But cheaters know other cheaters. Your in-group is a group that you identify with. Your in-group is a group that you identify with. This is a group that could be similar to being part of the jocks, right? The jock group. So maybe you're an athlete, maybe you're friends with other athletes. That is your in-group. Maybe you're preppy, maybe you're a fashionista, maybe you're a nerd. However you identify yourself, right? We all have in-groups. And so if we see other people in our in-group doing things, well, then we tend to replicate that. Likely to make their profiles private or create new ones to avoid ban on record label. So again, with these cheaters from this study, they were worried about being labeled. They were worried about being labeled as cheaters. What an ugly thing to be called. So here these game players were found to make profiles either private or create new ones to avoid and abstain from being labeled as such. Another study by Gino Ayal Arali conducted an experiment at Carnegie Mellon. A student who wore a Carnegie Mellon University shirt inspired 24% of the class to cheat. 24%. When the same student wore a University of Pittsburgh shirt, the class cheated only 4% of the time. Sorry, that should be 4% of the class. And so here we can see that there's an instance in which in-group identification is absolutely germane, is absolutely paramount to inspiring people to cheat. 24% versus 4% is remarkable. And while this is not a multivariate statistics class, I can confidently say that if you ran some sort of t-test or chi-square, depending, it would be statistically significant, meaning these differences are not subject to random chance or error. That is a sizable difference. It just goes to show you how quickly people can be persuaded to cheat. Let's keep going. Loss aversion. Who here likes to lose? Who here likes to win? By what disparity, by what difference does winning mean more to you than losing? Well, it's likely for most of us that we hate losing more than we love to gain. And that's especially true in life, right? We often think about different risks that we may take on. We assess the risk, we assess pros and cons, we assess negative outcomes of a risk, we consider positive outcomes from a risk. But ultimately, when we think about whether or not to take the risk, whether or not to purchase the car, whether or not to, date the woman or man or whatever it may be, we're more worried about losing out on something than gaining something. It's usually how people operate. So consumers are more inclined to cheat if in competition with others, rather than if they are simply improving their own welfare. So that's kind of another element here. We're also worried about losing face with others or being behind others. Video game players on League of Legends and StarCraft have been known to cheat by dropping out of matches they are losing in order to maintain their position on leaderboards. So loss aversion is enhanced and amplified when other people are involved in the activity. Consumers are less willing to cheat if they are being labeled cheaters rather than being asked not to cheat. So that's one strategy in persuading people not to cheat during video game play. Let's keep going. So what really constitutes cheating? What really constitutes it? Consumers will relabel and recast what they do, as not cheating to preserve their own self-concept as a non-cheater. That's the biggest thing here. We're also interested in self-preservation. How can we fix this? Asking consumers to agree to not cheat or drop out at the beginning of a game is a way to curb cheating. Identify stealing coins or tokens in a video game as stealing money. This is another way to curb behavior, right? The more that one reduces the space between a virtual world and reality, the more disinclined consumers become from cheating during video gameplay. Let's keep going. Decision making to keep playing a video game. Why do we keep playing a video game? So we've talked a little bit about scarcity and time. We've talked about cheating. But many people often will play the same game over and over again. Why do we do that? Why do we continue to make investments during video gameplay? Keep playing a video game. Motivation to compete is based on who we compare ourselves to, people who we know regarding their skills. So we may compare ourselves with similar time investments, right? One thing that consumers are good at is comparing themselves to other people. But that's not really enough. On a national scope, I might say to myself, well, yeah, I mean, John lives in Seattle, I live in New York, what does it matter? And he's invested, 1,000 hours in this game. I've only invested 100. I don't know the guy, 1. 2, I don't really live in his neighborhood. And 3, he's invested so much time that, he should be better than me. So that's something else to consider that we're about to get into a little bit. This notion of comparison by scale, this notion by comparison by some sort of anchor. We may compare ourselves with similar time investments. Games like Candy Crush Saga and Forza send alerts to players to indicate where other people are on their friends list to stoke and maintain rivalries. We don't really care as much how we appear or compete or do with strangers. After all, Madman 2050 on Fortnite is just somebody who I've played against, right? I have no relationship to him or her or whatever, and I just know that I've had several rounds with him playing the game. That doesn't really mean anything to me. If it's my sister, if it's my brother, cousin, best friend, everything's heightened. Everything's heightened. We prefer to compare ourselves to the people directly above us rather than those at the top or below us. So that's another element here. You may not really need to tell me how well I'm doing on a national level. Quite frankly, I probably don't care, because unless I'm really gunning for the top, what people are doing at the national or international level in League of Legends or StarCraft or Fortnite, it probably just isn't relevant to me. I'm probably not that good. But if you tell me how people are doing in New York, or if you tell me how people are doing in my city, or if you tell me how my friends and family are doing, that's a little bit more close to home. That resonates with me. That resonates with me. Let's keep going. Further motivations. Identifying video game players with similar demographic backgrounds can create baselines for competition. That's important to note. Big fish in small pond. That is a term for this. Big fish, small pond. We feel more motivated if we are told that we are competing against or amongst a small set of familiar comparison targets. I'm more motivated to compete if it's 10 of my friends in a game of League of Legends. You will feel better ranked at the top of a poorly performing group than at the bottom of a well-performing group. That's ultimately what big fish and small pond effect is. And so we want to feel big, and so sometimes it's better to be compared among friends and family than it is to be compared on a national scale. A national scale is a pretty big pond now, isn't it? But my city, it's a small pond, and I'm likely a bigger fish in my neighborhood than nationally. Definitely than internationally, my goodness. Many online video games allow you to compare yourself to others in your neighborhood and area. It gives us a smaller group for context so that we can stay motivated to be the biggest fish in our pond. Let's keep going. So are you happy that you won? At this point in the lecture, we've gone through a lot of different motivations and reasons to keep playing. Well, now we come to the time in which you've won. You beat everybody. Maybe you were playing Left 4 Dead. Maybe you were playing anything at all. Any NBA 2K, Madden, whatever it is or was. So now you might be saying to yourself, all right, well, I finished third, I finished second, I finished first. So, how do I feel? People who finish in third place may be happier than those who finish in second place. Why is that? Well, we can see it in the Olympics, and athletes have been studied, in particular their body language and their expressions after winning and losing and placing. And those in third place may just be saying to themselves, well, I'm just happy to be here. I'm just happy to be here. Those in second place might say to themselves, I really should have just won the whole darn thing. Should have won the whole darn thing. People can be more competitive over cooperative if it meant sliding down in rankings, even if they would hold more points than otherwise. People will cooperate with each other to move up even one place or stay out of last place. So again, we have loss aversion here. Again, we're more competitive because we don't want to slide down. No matter what it takes, I am not losing. I am not having a lesser ranking. In Fortnite, I will be more competitive. I will be more shrewd. I will be more stingy. I will do whatever it takes. But if I'm more interested in rising up than preventing sliding down, well, then I might be more cooperative. I might say to myself, okay, we should probably talk Jason is in 13th place, Elizabeth is in 11th place, I'm in 14th place. Maybe if we band together, the three of us can crack the top 10. There's also this other element that I regularly see on a daily basis. I am sure that I am also guilty of this as well. This is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. Anybody here play an instrument? Anybody play an instrument for your parents, for a friend, and then have them say, yeah, I'm sure I could play the drums as well? Anybody here study hard for an exam, crush it, get an A, and somebody else say, yeah, I'm sure I could do that as well? Anybody here paint a picture and have somebody else say, oh yeah, I'm sure I could draw too? Dunning-Kruger effect states the following: people who aren't very good at an activity overestimate skills, while those who are experts tend to sell themselves short. I myself, as an academic who pushes himself to publish a lot, the most frightening word for me is being called an expert. And I've told people who have tried to call me an expert that I am not an expert. And I think, having gone through my own journey in publishing and becoming a better researcher, I can confidently tell you the better you get at something, the more you realize there are plenty of other things that you can get better at and be better at and do more and improve. And so it's an interesting just kind of personal self-reflection here in looking at Dunning-Kruger effect, because I'm heavily involved in research, but even I would not call myself an expert, that's for sure. But again, I see it from other people who may say, oh, research is this, it's that, it's easy, it's simple, and they don't really do research. So it's kind of an interesting effect, but it happens. So the next time you're playing guitar, the next time you're playing basketball and you happen to be on the varsity team, or maybe you're playing for your university or college, and somebody says, yeah, I'm pretty good at basketball, you can kind of point to the Dunning-Kruger effect and say, okay, this guy's probably played a little bit, and unfortunately, he just thinks that he's really, really good. So we see this effect all the time. We see this effect all the time. And again, this is something that might explain why somebody feels as though they should have won at a game. Like, I don't understand. Like, I shouldn't be this bad. Well, maybe you should be this bad. Maybe you haven't invested enough into this skill or activity or whatever it may be, mastering whatever you have to master. Let's keep going. What about side quests and achievements? My God. Oh, my brother and I growing up, we played Zelda, we played Final Fantasy, we played all of these games. There were so much side missions, and even in Grand Theft Auto, him and I played. There were always side missions, and now there's, DLCs, downloadable content, and all this other stuff we have to do. Are we ever done? Well, there's kind of an effect that these video game publishers are preying on when we look at this. Zeigarnik effect. The Zeigarnik effect says the following: people remember uncompleted tasks, and so they feel obligated to complete side effects. And so we remember that we haven't completed certain things, that we kind of did this kind of halfway decently. Yeah, the video game gave me a B score in Cuphead, but darn it, I want an A. And so I might say to myself, well, I got to do this again, or I have to go get another Devil's Contract, or I have to do this, or I have to do that, because I can't have this happen. I want everything completed. So we work hard to ensure, sometimes, some of us, to make sure that everything is completed in gameplay. And so that's why some of these video games are just so darn long and detailed and fun and interesting and complex, because they wind up preying upon our own proclivities to want things done and completed. Psychological reactance. Options are taken away. Video game players may work harder to keep options open. Ooh. You can only collect this sword right after you kill the boss. You can only collect this sword for the next week. Scarcity plays a role in here once again. Video game players may work harder to keep options open. We also have something here called self-determination theory. We also have something called self-determination theory here. We enjoy playing video games for social, immersion, and achievement-based activities. Now, in order to achieve internal psychological well-being, first, according to the theory, we need to feel competent at what we're doing. So we might need to think about how many coins we're collecting, or chocobos we're raising in Final Fantasy, or how many pigs or animals we're slaughtering to raise our points and experience points in World of Warcraft, or whatever it might be. We need to be good at that. We need to be good at slaying and slaughtering animals, or enemies, or whatever it may be. Second lever. We need to feel like we have meaningful options in how to do the activity. We're selecting this activity. We're selecting this particular activity. We have options, and I'm the one who's doing the selection. So this deals with autonomy. Not only am I good at slaughtering pigs in World of Warcraft, I'm doing this on my own. I selected this. I elected to engage in this activity. And then C, the need to connect and relate to others as you are doing the activity. You might share this with other people. You might post about it. You might stream it live on Twitch or on YouTube. But either way, you're talking about what you've done with other people. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to connect with people during video game play. So much of what we do as video game players is inherently linked, and really inextricably linked, to people. We share points, we share scores, we share competition, we share information about how to defeat a dragon or some monster or behemoth. So much of what we do in video game play really is linked through social connections. Be it people we know, be it people we don't know. And so that last lever is extraordinarily key in achieving intrinsic well-being. Let's keep going. And trophies. We're interested in trophies and loot. Our minds are geared toward finding treasure and loot from other destinations. We constantly look for patterns when we search for treasure, gems, powers, potions, and other elements during video gameplay. This is a problem, though, because video games are inherently wired to be random. That means you might find a health potion in Cave 1, then maybe you die, but then you may go back to that same cave, and guess what? The health potion is not there. But part of our nervous system has evolved over the course of our lifetime as humans, as Homo sapiens, in gathering wisdom. Sapien being wisdom. And so we're always accruing information about our surroundings. We're always accruing details, ways in which that we can grow, minutia, every little detail that we can gather to get a better sense of what's going on. And so finding loot, treasure, items, and such is randomized, but many of us fall susceptible to post hoc ergo propter hoc, a faulty causality between two variables. We try to identify patterns. Oh, when the pig is eating grass to the west, that means there's a potion in the cave to the east. It doesn't work out that way. And so many times we find frustration in video games because we are inclined to look for patterns. We're inclined to look for patterns all the time. Because in reality, there are patterns, right? Certainly there's some randomness to life, but we know that there are patterns, right? We know when there's a red stoplight that people will stop. We know that when there's the white guy walking on the street light or right by the crosswalk, we know that we can go. We are so steeped and indoctrinated with patterns and ways of living that video gameplay is weird for many of us because there's so much randomness. There really are no issues if a pig doesn't show up right next to the cave. There really are no issues if a monster doesn't appear that time you went swimming in the pond in the video game to look for him. There are no issues. In some respects, you're really bound by the way the video game publishers have just simply engineered the game. And the game can run, and it can run well, and it can run weird, but there really are no negative consequences of randomization in video gameplay. But too much randomness in reality is something that we're not used to as people. There has to be some order in life. Video gameplay doesn't really afford us that, at least not very much. As you can see from video gameplay, there's quite a bit to consider. We have time, we have those who may be cheating and thinking of maybe different ways to dissuade people from cheating. There's also this notion of pattern seeking and post hoc ergo propter hoc, that we find faulty causalities all the time as we're stumbling through video games, trying to game the system, trying to figure out what's going on. But really part of the journey in playing video games is the randomness. There's so much randomness and unknownness that it's very immersive and captivating to a high extent, perhaps more so than maybe the world that we live in. Well, that's all the time we have on Late Night Learning. As always, keep laughing and keep learning.